She didn't just show up, she kept driving her SUV straight onto my lakefront property like the gravel road was her personal runway, throwing HOA threats out the window before she even parked. This morning, she rolled up again, blocking my cabin steps and waving another fake citation she clearly printed at home. "You're in violation," she barked, insisting the association had authority over land it never owned. I didn't bother arguing. The red recording light on my porch camera had already captured her trespassing all week, and the county tow truck I'd called was rumbling down the hill right on schedule. When she saw it, her confidence cracked for the first time. And if you've ever had someone try to bully you off land that's legally yours, tell me where you're watching from, because this was the moment her SUV left my property, but not the way it came in. I was standing on the dock when I heard the engine. The lake had been perfectly still that morning, the kind of quiet you pay for when you buy waterfront property this far from the city. Mist still clung to the surface, and I had my coffee in one hand, just watching the sun break through the pines on the far shore. Then came the rumble, low at first, then louder, closer, angrier. I turned around and saw the dust cloud rising from my private road. She was back. Her white SUV came tearing down the gravel like she was late for an appointment she'd made with herself. No hesitation, no slowing down at the property line. She just rolled right past the survey markers I'd had installed when I bought this place 6 months ago, past the sign that read "Private Road, Authorized Vehicles Only," and pulled up so close to my cabin that her front bumper nearly kissed the porch steps. The engine cut off. The door swung open, and out she stepped. She looked exactly like she had the last 2 times. Hair cut in that sharp bob, dyed blonde with darker roots just starting to show, a pink cardigan over a white blouse, khaki slacks, and loafers that had probably never touched actual dirt before this week. She carried a clipboard like it was a weapon, and her oversized sunglasses stayed perched on her nose even though the sun was barely up. She didn't look at me. She looked at my cabin like it had personally offended her. I set my coffee down on the dock railing and started walking back toward the house. By the time I got halfway across the yard, she was already at my front door. Not knocking, not waiting. She grabbed the handle and tried to turn it. Locked. Of course, it was locked. This was my home. She rattled it once, twice, then stepped back and rapped her knuckles hard against the window. The sound was sharp, deliberate, the knock of someone who expected to be obeyed. "I know you're in there," she called out, her voice loud enough to echo across the water. "We need to talk about your violations." I stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, and just watched her. She finally turned and saw me standing there. Her expression didn't change. No embarrassment, no acknowledgement that she'd just tried to open my door without permission. She adjusted her sunglasses and lifted the clipboard. "This property violates HOA standards," she said, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. "I'm here on behalf of the association to notify you of immediate compliance requirements." She pulled a sheet of paper from the clipboard and held it out toward me. I didn't take it. I stayed where I was, hands in my pockets, waiting for her to finish her performance. The paper looked like it had been printed on a home inkjet, thin stock, faded ink in one corner. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "HOA Compliance Notice." Below that was a list of alleged violations. The dock is in disrepair, unapproved watercraft storage. Lawn maintenance is below community standards. Every single item was fabricated. My dock was new. My kayak was stored neatly on the rack I'd built myself. And my lawn was just fine for a lakefront cabin that sat on 2 acres of mostly wooded land. "You have 72 hours to address these issues," she continued, still holding the paper out like I was supposed to take it and thank her. "Failure to comply will result in further action, including potential liens against your property." I looked up at the corner of my porch. The security camera I had installed 3 weeks ago was right there, its little red recording light blinking steadily. She hadn't noticed it. She was too busy staring at me, waiting for me to crack. "Ma'am," I said slowly, keeping my voice even, "this property isn't part of any HOA." She blinked, her mouth twitched, then she smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that said she'd heard this before and didn't care. "All lakefront properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction," she said. "You can check the county records if you'd like, but I assure you, We have full authority here. I almost laughed. I'd already checked the county records, multiple times. I'd pulled my deed from the recorder's office the day after her first visit. I'd reviewed the plat map. I'd confirmed with the title company that there were 0 restrictive covenants attached to this parcel. My land had been privately held for 40 years before I bought it, and the previous owner had never signed any HOA agreement. She was lying, and she either knew it or she'd convinced herself that saying it loud enough would make it true. "I've seen my deed," I said. "There's no HOA covenant on this property." Her smile faded. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the smudge of mascara under her left eye, the way her jaw tightened. "People like you," she said quietly, her voice dropping into something colder, sharper, "don't belong on prime lakefront land. This area is for families who respect community standards. We will reclaim this property one way or another." There it was, not about violations, not about regulations. It was about control, about deciding who gets to live where. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, then looked back up at the camera. She followed my gaze this time, saw the lens, saw the blinking light. Her face went still for just a second. Then she turned, walked back to her SUV, and climbed in without another word. The engine roared to life. She backed up fast, tires spitting gravel, and swung around in a wide arc that tore up a patch of grass near my driveway. Before she left, she rolled down her window and stuck the fake citation onto my mailbox with a piece of tape. Then she was gone, dust trailing behind her like a threat she'd left in the air. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the engine fade into the distance. Then I walked over, pulled the paper off my mailbox, and went inside. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into the county recorder's website. I pulled up my parcel number and downloaded the full deed history again, just to be sure. Everything was the same. No HOA, no covenants, no restrictions. I saved the file, backed it up to 3 separate locations, and opened a new document. At the top, I typed harassment log, then I started writing. Date, time, description of incident, photo evidence. I was going to need all of it. The citation sat on my kitchen table under the warm glow of the oil lamp I kept burning in the evenings. I'd been staring at it for the better part of an hour, turning it over in my hands, holding it up to the light. The paper was cheap, standard printer stock, the kind you could buy at any office supply store for $10 a ream. The ink had that slightly grainy texture you get from a laser printer that's running low on toner. In the top corner, the so-called HOA logo was blurry, like it had been copied and pasted from a low-resolution image someone found online. I ran my finger along the bottom edge where a signature was supposed to be. Nothing. No name, no title, just a blank line with the word "Authorized Representative" printed underneath. There was no notary seal, no embossed stamp, no reference to any specific statute or county ordinance that would give this document any legal weight. It was a prop, a convincing one if you didn't know what to look for, but a prop nonetheless. I set the paper down and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, and I navigated to the county recorder's office website. I'd been here before, but this time I was looking for something specific. I entered my property address into the parcel viewer and waited for the map to load. When it did, my lot appeared in bright green, outlined clearly with boundary lines that matched the survey I'd paid for 6 months ago. I clicked on the parcel information tab, owner name, purchase date, and legal description, all correct. Then I scrolled down to the section labeled Covenants and Restrictions. It was blank, completely blank. No HOA, no homeowners association agreement, no restrictive covenants of any kind. I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder I'd started labeling Evidence. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for the state HOA registry. Every legitimate homeowners association in the state was required to file with the Secretary of State's office. I typed in the name printed on the fake citation, Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. The search came back empty. No registered entity, no business license, no incorporation documents, nothing. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. So either this HOA didn't exist at all, or it existed in name only without any legal authority to enforce anything. I pulled up my deed next, the actual PDF I had received from the title company at closing. It was a clean document, 22 pages of legal descriptions, easements, and title history going back to 1973, when the land had first been subdivided from a larger parcel. I searched the entire document for the word association. 0 results. I searched for covenant. 0 results. I searched for restriction. The only hit was a standard utility easement that ran along the eastern edge of my property. Nothing about landscaping, nothing about docks, nothing about community standards. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. The number wasn't in my contacts, but the area code was local. I picked up. Hello? The voice on the other end was quiet, almost cautious. Is this the guy with the cabin on Clearwater Road? I sat up straighter. Yeah. Who's this? There was a pause, then a sigh. My name's Roger. I live about 2 miles down the lake from you. Got a place on the North Shore. I heard you've been getting hassled by that HOA woman. News traveled fast in small lake communities. I shouldn't have been surprised. You could say that, I replied. She's been on my property 3 times this week. Roger made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. She hit me, too, about a month ago. Same clipboard, same threats. Told me my dock wasn't up to code and I needed to remove it or face fines. I checked my deed just like you probably did. No HOA. My land's been in my family since the 80s. We never signed anything. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. So, what did you do? Roger hesitated. I ignored her, figured she'd go away. But then she started showing up at odd hours, took pictures of my property, posted them online with complaints about how I was ruining the lake's aesthetic. My wife got worried. We almost called a lawyer, but then she just stopped coming around. Moved on to someone else, I guess. He paused again. That someone else is you. Yeah, I said quietly. Looks like it. Roger's voice dropped lower. Listen, I don't know if this helps, but I heard she's got someone backing her. Someone with connections in the county. A guy who runs the so-called HOA board. I don't know his name, but people say he's got pull. Be careful. I thanked him and hung up. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the lake. The water was dark now, reflecting the first stars starting to appear overhead. Then I saw it, on the far side of the lake, maybe half a mile away. A set of headlights. They were stationary, pointed in my direction. I couldn't make out the vehicle, but the angle was deliberate. They weren't passing through, they were watching. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, and the lights didn't move. Whoever it was, they wanted me to know they were there. I pulled the curtain closed and went back to my laptop. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I opened a new document and started drafting an email to the county sheriff's office. I kept it factual, described the repeated trespassing, attached photos of the tire tracks she'd left on my lawn, included timestamps from my security camera footage. I stopped short of sending it, not yet. I wanted to gather more evidence first. I wanted to make sure that when I did reach out to law enforcement, I had everything documented so thoroughly that there would be no question about what was happening here. I saved the draft and closed my laptop. The cabin was quiet except for the faint creak of the wooden beams settling in the cool night air. I walked to the door, checked the lock, and glanced up at the security camera mounted above the porch. The red light was still blinking, still recording. I made a mental note to check the cloud backup in the morning, to make sure every second of footage was stored safely off-site, where no one could tamper with it. Outside, the headlights across the lake finally moved, slowly. They turned and disappeared into the trees, but the message had been sent. They were watching, and they wanted me to know it. The next morning, I needed to drive into town for work. I'm a freelance consultant, so most of my job happens from the cabin. But once a week, I meet clients at a coffee shop about 20 minutes south. I grabbed my laptop bag, locked up, and headed to my truck. That's when I saw her SUV blocking the end of my driveway where it met the county road. She wasn't just parked nearby. She was positioned perpendicular across the gravel, bumper to bumper, making it impossible for me to get past without driving into the ditch. I walked down the driveway slowly, taking my time. She was sitting in the driver's seat with the window rolled up, phone in hand, typing something. She didn't look up when I approached. I stood next to her door and knocked on the glass. She glanced at me, then went back to her phone. I knocked again. This time, she sighed, like I was inconveniencing her, and lowered the window exactly 2 inches, just enough to talk through. "This road is under HOA management," she said flatly, eyes still on her phone. "You need to pay the quarterly access fee before using it." I stared at her. "This is a private road. I own the easement. It's in my deed." She finally looked up, her expression blank. "That's not what our records show. If you want to dispute it, you'll need to attend the next board meeting and present your case." She raised the window back up and went back to her phone. I pulled out mine and took 3 photos. Her SUV, her license plate. The angle of her vehicle is blocking the road. Then I opened my harassment log and added a new entry. Date, time, location, description. I stood there for another minute, just documenting, letting her see me do it. She didn't move. I walked back to the cabin, got in my truck, and called my client to reschedule. 15 minutes later, she drove away. That afternoon, I installed 2 more security cameras, one covering the driveway entrance, one pointed at the mailbox. I ran the wiring myself, mounted them high enough that they'd be hard to reach, and linked everything to a cloud service that saved footage in real time. If she came back, if she did anything, I'd have it recorded from 3 different angles with timestamps that would hold up in court. I wasn't going to rely on memory or word of mouth. I was building a case. The next day, I found another citation taped to my mailbox. Same cheap paper, same fake logo. This one claimed I was violating noise ordinances by running a generator after 10 p.m. I didn't own a generator. I had solar panels on the roof and a battery backup system that didn't make a sound. I peeled the citation off, photographed it, and added it to my evidence folder. Then I checked my camera footage. She'd come by at 6:43 in the morning, stuck the paper on the mailbox, and left without getting out of her SUV. The whole thing took 11 seconds. 2 days after that, she was back. This time, she didn't block the driveway. She parked on the county road just beyond my property line and sat there with her phone pointed at my cabin. I watched from the window as she panned the camera across my dock, my kayak, my truck. She was recording. I grabbed my own phone and did the same, filming her filming me. When she noticed, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, a smile that said she wanted me to know exactly what she was doing. That night, I got a message from Roger, the neighbor who had called me earlier in the week. He sent me a link to a post someone had made online. I opened it and felt my stomach tighten. It was a photo of my cabin, taken from the water. The caption read, "Another example of neglect ruining our beautiful lake community. Unapproved structures, environmental violations, and a complete disregard for neighborhood standards. The HOA is taking action." The post had 63 reactions and 14 comments, most of them from people I'd never met, talking about how lakefront property owners needed to be held accountable. I read through the comments slowly. A few people defended me, pointing out that if the property wasn't part of an HOA, then there was nothing to enforce. But most of the comments echoed the same sentiment. People like me were lowering property values. People like me didn't respect the community. One commenter even suggested that the county should revoke permits for cabins that didn't meet association standards. It was a coordinated narrative, and it was spreading. I took screenshots of everything, the post, the comments, the timestamp. Then I did something I'd been putting off. I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Linda Marsh, and she'd been recommended by the title company that handled my closing. I explained the situation in detail, the repeated trespassing, the fake citations, the online harassment. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Do you have documentation?" she asked. I told her I had logs, photos, videos, and saved emails. "Good," she said. "Keep documenting everything. Don't engage with her directly. Don't argue, just record. If this escalates, we can file for a restraining order. We can also send a cease and desist letter, but that might just make her angrier." She paused. "Has she damaged any property yet?" I thought about the tire tracks on my lawn, the way she'd torn up the grass. Minor, but yes, a little, I said. Linda's voice hardened. "If she damages anything else, call the sheriff immediately. Trespassing is one thing. Property damage is criminal mischief. That's a misdemeanor. And it creates a paper trail we can use." I thanked her and hung up. The sun was setting over the lake, casting long shadows across the water. I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, watching the light fade. My phone buzzed. An email. The subject line read, "Final Notice HOA Compliance Required." I opened it. The sender was listed as Lakeview Estates HOA Legal Department. The email was 3 paragraphs of legalese about violations, fees, and consequences. At the bottom, in bold text, it said I owed $5,000 in fines and administrative costs. If I didn't pay within 10 business days, they would file a lien against my property. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Linda with a single sentence. "Is this enforceable?" Her reply came back in under 5 minutes. "No, it's a bluff. Save it. This is evidence of extortion." I printed the email, highlighted the dollar amount and the lien threat, and added it to my growing file. The folder was getting thick. Citations, photos, logs, legal consultations. I was building something they couldn't ignore. Outside, the lake was dark. Somewhere across the water, I thought I saw headlights again. Watching, waiting. I finished my drink and went inside. Tomorrow. I'd call the county sheriff's office. It was time to make this official. The invitation arrived in my mailbox 3 days later. Not taped on like the fake citations. This one was in an envelope, cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering that reads, "Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association Emergency Meeting." The date was set for the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. Location listed as the community center off Route 12. I held it up to the light, real paper this time. Professionally printed, someone had put money into this. I wasn't sure if attending was smart or reckless, but I needed to see who was behind this operation. I needed to know if it was just her or if there was a larger group orchestrating the harassment. So, on Tuesday evening, I drove the 15 minutes to the community center, pulled into the half-empty parking lot, and walked inside. The building smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. A handwritten sign in the hallway pointed toward the meeting room. I followed it. The room was small. Folding chairs are arranged in rows facing a table at the front. Maybe 15 people scattered throughout, most of them older. A few couples whispering to each other. I recognized a couple of faces from around the lake. People I'd seen at the boat launch or the general store, but no one I knew by name. And there, sitting at the front table, was the woman from the SUV. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked pleased. Next to her sat a man I'd never seen before, late 50s, maybe 60, silver hair combed back neatly, charcoal vest over a pressed white shirt, no tie. He had the kind of calm, controlled posture that comes from years of being listened to. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, no notes, no papers. He didn't need them. When he saw me walk in, he gave a small nod, the kind you'd give a stranger at a business function, polite, detached, calculated. The meeting started exactly at 7. The woman stood first, introduced herself as the HOA compliance officer, and thanked everyone for coming on short notice. Then she gestured to the man beside her. "This is our board president," she said. "He'll be addressing some urgent matters regarding lakefront property standards." The man stood slowly. He didn't walk to a podium. He just stood there at the front of the room, hands in his pockets, and started talking. His voice was smooth, measured, the kind of voice that made you think he was being reasonable even when he wasn't. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "As many of you know, our lake community has always prided itself on maintaining high standards, clean shorelines, well-kept properties, a shared commitment to preserving the natural beauty that makes this area so desirable." He paused, letting that sink in. "Unfortunately, we've seen a troubling trend recently. Properties that don't meet those standards, owners who refuse to comply with basic community expectations." He clicked a button, and a projector screen descended from the ceiling. A slideshow started. The first image was a wide shot of the lake at sunset. Beautiful, postcard perfect. The second image was someone's overgrown yard. The third was a dock with peeling paint. The fourth was my cabin, taken from the water. Same angle as the one posted online. The image stayed on the screen longer than the others. He let people look at it. "This property," he said, his tone sharpening just slightly, "has been flagged for multiple violations, unapproved structures, failure to maintain community aesthetic standards, refusal to cooperate with compliance officers." He turned and looked directly at me. "The owner is here tonight. Perhaps he'd like to explain why he believes the rules don't apply to him." Every head in the room turned. I felt the weight of their stares. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice calm. My property isn't part of this HOA, I said. I've checked the county records. There's no covenant attached to my deed. The room went silent. A few people glanced at each other. The woman at the front table opened her mouth to respond, but the man held up a hand, stopping her. He smiled. Not warm, not cold, just a smile that acknowledged I'd spoken. I appreciate your diligence, he said, but all lakefront properties in this jurisdiction fall under our regulatory authority per county ordinance. You may not have signed a covenant personally, but the land itself is subject to standards established by this association in coordination with local government. He said it so smoothly, so confidently, that I almost believed him. Almost. Which ordinance? I asked. He blinked, just once. Then his smile returned. I don't have the statute number memorized, but our legal team can provide documentation if you'd like to review it. The point is, we have a responsibility to protect property values for everyone in this community. That includes enforcing standards. Even when individual owners resist, he turned back to the room. We're not here to punish anyone. We're here to preserve what we've all worked hard to build. A man in the second row raised his hand. Middle-aged, flannel shirt, calloused hands. He looked like he'd lived on the lake his whole life. Hold on, he said. If his cabin's not in the HOA boundaries, how can you enforce anything? The woman jumped in before the man could answer. The boundaries were expanded in 2015 to include all waterfront parcels. It's a matter of public record. I pulled out my phone and opened the file I'd saved earlier that week. The HOA boundary map filed with the state. I'd studied it carefully. The declared boundaries stopped half a mile north of my property. My parcel wasn't included, not even close. I held up my phone. I have the boundary map right here. My land's not on it. The man in the vest didn't flinch. He just looked at me with that same calm expression, like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. Mr. He paused, waiting for me to fill in my name. I didn't. He continued anyway. You may think you understand the law, but we have a legal team with decades of experience in property management and HOA governance. I'd strongly suggest you reconsider your position before this becomes more complicated than it needs to be. It wasn't a threat, not technically, but the meaning was clear. Back down, or things will get worse. I didn't respond. I just sat back down and let the meeting continue. They talked about dues, about upcoming projects, about enforcement policies. The whole time, I felt his eyes on me. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out slowly. A couple of them gave me sympathetic looks. One older woman touched my arm as she passed and whispered, "Be careful with them." I thanked her and left. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching people drive away. The woman and the man in the vest were the last to leave. They stood by her SUV, talking. He handed her a folder. She nodded, got in her vehicle, and drove off. He stood there for a moment longer, looking at his phone, then got into a black sedan and disappeared down the road. I waited until the lot was empty before I started my engine. When I got home, I went straight to my laptop. I searched for county ordinances related to HOA authority. I read through municipal codes. I pulled up state statutes on property regulation. Nowhere, in any official document, did I find anything that gave an HOA automatic jurisdiction over land outside its declared boundaries. He'd lied, confidently, publicly, and most of the people in that room had believed him. I called Linda, my attorney. It was late, but she picked up. I told her what happened, the meeting, the slideshow, the veiled threat. She listened, then sighed. They're trying to intimidate you into compliance. It's a tactic. Make you feel isolated. Make you think they have more power than they do. But here's what you need to know. If they keep harassing you, we can file for a restraining order. And if they damage your property, that's criminal. Call the sheriff immediately if anything happens. I thanked her and hung up. The cabin felt too quiet. I walked outside onto the porch and looked at the lake. The water was black under the moonless sky. Then I heard it, a sound down by the dock, soft, deliberate. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. 2 figures, dark hoodies. One of them was crouched by my kayak, doing something to the tie-down ropes. I hit the outdoor lights. The floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the entire dock area. The 2 figures froze, then bolted toward the tree line. One of them turned back, raised a hand, and gave me a gesture I didn't need to interpret. Then they were gone. swallowed by the darkness. I walked down to the dock. The rope securing my kayak had been cut halfway through. Another few pulls and it would have drifted into the lake. I took photos, added another entry to my log, and stood there in the cold, listening to the silence, knowing this was just the beginning. I woke up to the sound of wood splintering. It was barely dawn, the sky still gray, and for a moment I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I heard it again, a crack, sharp and deliberate. I got out of bed, pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold enough to see my breath. I looked toward the dock. 2 of the support beams had been sawed partway through. The cuts were clean, intentional, and done with a handsaw or something similar. The boards were hanging at an angle, still attached but compromised. My kayak was gone. I found it 50 feet down the shoreline, caught in a tangle of brush where the current had pushed it. On the cabin door, sprayed in red paint, were 2 words: "Leave now." I stood there staring at the message. The paint was still wet, dripping slightly down the wood grain. Whoever did this had been here within the last hour, maybe less. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I explained the situation: vandalism, trespassing, property damage. She told me a deputy would be out within 30 minutes. I spent that time documenting everything. Photos of the dock, photos of the door, photos of the kayak tangled in the brush. I pulled up my security camera footage and scrolled back through the night. At 3:42 a.m., 2 figures appeared on screen. Same dark hoodies as before. One carried a saw. The other had a spray paint can. They worked quickly, efficiently, like they'd done this before. I saved the footage, backed it up, and waited. The deputy arrived 28 minutes later. His name was Hayes. Young, maybe late 20s, but he carried himself with the kind of steady professionalism that made you trust him immediately. He stepped out of his cruiser, looked at the door, looked at the dock, and pulled out a notebook. "Walk me through it," he said. I did, told him about the harassment, the fake citations, the meeting, the 2 people who'd been here before. He listened without interrupting, writing everything down in tight, neat handwriting. When I finished, he asked if I had footage. I pulled it up on my phone and handed it to him. He watched the clip twice, zooming in on the faces. They were partially obscured by the hoods, but you could see enough. Build, height, movement patterns. He nodded slowly. "This is criminal mischief," he said. "Class B misdemeanor in this state. It could be elevated depending on the damage cost. You have an estimate on repairs." I looked at the dock. "A few hundred for materials. I can fix it myself, but the beams need replacing." Hayes took more photos with his own camera, measured the saw cuts, and scraped a sample of the paint into an evidence bag. "I'm filing a report," he said. "This goes on record. If they come back, if anything else happens, call us immediately. Don't wait." He looked at me directly. "You said this is connected to an HOA dispute." I nodded. He frowned. "HOAs don't have enforcement authority for criminal acts. If they're hiring people to do this, that's a conspiracy. That's serious." I told him about the man at the meeting, the veiled threats, the woman who kept showing up. Hayes wrote it all down. "Have you considered a restraining order?" he asked. I told him my attorney had mentioned it. "Do it," he said. "Get it filed. It creates a legal boundary. If they cross it, we can arrest them on the spot." He handed me his card. "Anytime, day or night, you see them on your property again, you call me directly." After he left, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from anger, from the realization that this wasn't going to stop unless I made it stop. I called Linda, told her what happened. She didn't hesitate. "I'm drafting the restraining order today. We'll file it by the end of the week. In the meantime, do not engage with them. Do not respond to calls, emails, or anything. Let me handle it." 3 days later, I was replacing the dock beams when I noticed something was wrong with the solar panels on my roof. The cabin ran almost entirely on solar power, with a battery backup system for cloudy days. I climbed up to check the array and found 3 of the connection cables had been cut. Clean cuts, wire cutters. The panels were intact, but without the cables, they couldn't charge the batteries. I was running on backup power, and it wouldn't last more than a day or 2. I didn't bother calling Hayes this time. I just added it to the log, took photos, and ordered replacement cables online. But I was starting to see the pattern. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to make living here impossible, cut off my power, damage my access to the water, isolate me, wear me down until I gave up and left. That night, I was sitting inside editing the harassment log when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Not the SUV this time, a truck. I looked out the window and saw a man standing near the tree line, just beyond the reach of my floodlights. Big guy, 6'3", maybe 6'4", tank top despite the cold, arms covered in tattoos. He didn't approach the cabin. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at my door. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. He stood there for 5 full minutes. Didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove off. The message was clear. They knew where I lived. They could send people whenever they wanted, people who didn't care about cameras or deputies or restraining orders. I saved the video and added it to the file. The next morning, I drove into town to get supplies for the solar panel repair. When I came back, I found nails scattered across my driveway. Dozens of them, roofing nails, the kind with wide, flat heads, spread out in a deliberate pattern. I stopped the truck before driving over them and got out. It took me 20 minutes to sweep them all up. While I was doing it, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello. The voice on the other end was hers, the woman from the SUV. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. No greeting, no introduction, just straight to the point. We have people in the county, friends in the commissioner's office. You think a deputy filing a report is going to change anything? You're wasting your time. I kept my voice level. I'm recording this call, I said. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. Then she laughed. Not a real laugh. A sharp, bitter sound. Record whatever you want, she said. It won't matter. She hung up. I immediately saved the recording, backed it up to 3 different locations, and forwarded it to Linda with a timestamp and transcription. Her reply came back within minutes. This is gold, threat, intimidation, possible witness tampering if she's implying county officials are involved. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. I sat in my truck, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the pile of nails I'd swept to the side of the driveway. They weren't going to stop. Not with citations, not with damaged property, not with vague threats. They were escalating, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. That evening, I went through my security footage one more time. I wanted to see if I'd missed anything. I pulled up the clip from the night the dock was vandalized and zoomed in on the 2 figures. One of them turned slightly toward the camera at one point, just for a second. The hood slipped back enough to show part of his neck. And there, clear as day, was a tattoo. A small logo, circular, stylized letters. I zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow and felt my stomach drop. It was the same logo from the fake HOA citations, the same design. I took a screenshot, enhanced it, saved it. This wasn't just harassment. This was organized. The HOA, or whoever was running it, had hired people to damage my property, people they knew, people they could control. I sent the screenshot to Hayes with a message. Recognize this logo. It matches the HOA paperwork. Suggests a direct connection between the organization and the vandalism. His response was immediate. Bringing this to my supervisor. This changes things. I closed my laptop and walked outside. The lake was calm. The stars were out. Somewhere across the water, I thought I heard an engine. But when I looked, there was nothing. Just darkness. Just waiting. I went back inside, locked the door, and checked the camera feeds one more time before bed. The red lights were blinking, still recording, still watching, and so was I. I spent 2 days preparing, not reacting, not waiting, preparing. I called Hayes and told him I had a plan. He listened, asked a few questions, then said he'd coordinate with his supervisor. I called Linda and walked her through it step by step. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "It's risky, but if it works, it ends this." I told her I was done waiting for it to end on its own. The first thing I did was install one more camera, hidden in the eaves above my front door, angled to capture anyone on the porch, high resolution, night vision, audio recording. I tested the feed 3 times to make sure it was streaming to the cloud in real time. Then I put up a new sign at the property line, bright yellow with black lettering. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted, surveillance in use. The second thing I did was make a very public post online. Nothing aggressive, just a simple statement. Enjoying my legally owned lakefront cabin this weekend, no HOA, no restrictions, just peace. I posted it where I knew people from the lake community would see it. Then I waited. It took less than 48 hours. On Saturday morning, I heard her SUV coming down my private road. I didn't go outside. I pulled up the camera feeds on my tablet and watched. She drove past the new sign without slowing, past the survey markers, and pulled up close to the cabin. This time, she had her phone out before she even opened the door. She was live streaming. I switched to the audio feed from the hidden camera. "We're here at the property that has repeatedly violated community standards," she said, voice sharp and authoritative. "The HOA has tried to work with this individual, but he refuses to comply. Today we're asserting our legal authority over this land." She walked toward my front door, still filming, tried the handle, locked. She rattled it, then kicked the base of the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Scuff marks appeared on the wood. "As you can see, this structure is not being maintained," she said, turning the camera to show the door. She panned across the dock, the kayak. "Unapproved watercraft storage, repairs done without HOA approval. This is exactly the kind of negligence that damages property values." The view count on her stream climbed past 200. She walked around the cabin, narrating violations that didn't exist, completely unaware of the 3 cameras recording her every move. That's when I stepped outside. I stood on the porch, tablet in hand, and waited. When she turned and saw me, she didn't stop filming. "Here's the property owner now," she said into the camera. "Maybe he can explain why he thinks the rules don't apply to him." I held up the tablet, split screen, her live stream on one side, my security footage, on the other hand. Both showed her kicking my door, both time-stamped. I turned it so her viewers could see. "You just committed criminal trespass," I said calmly. "You attempted forced entry, you damaged my property, all on camera, yours and mine." I pointed to the blinking red lights. 3 angles, cloud backed up, and the sheriff is on his way. Her face changed. The smile died. She looked up at the cameras, then down at her phone. The comments were scrolling fast now. "Wait, is she trespassing? You can't kick someone's door. She's getting recorded." Her hand wavered, but she didn't turn off the stream. "This property falls under HOA jurisdiction," she said, voice thin. "We have every right to inspect." I shook my head. "No covenant on my deed. County records prove it. What you have is documented harassment and property damage." The sound of a diesel engine cut through the air. Hayes's cruiser came down the driveway, followed by a flatbed tow truck. Hayes stepped out, looked at her SUV on my property, looked at the scuff marks on my door, and walked over. "Ma'am, I need identification and proof that you have permission to be here." She fumbled for her driver's license. Hayes examined it, then looked at me. "Does she have permission?" I shook my head. "No. She's been trespassing for weeks. I have footage of damage to my dock, my door, and ongoing harassment." Hayes turned back to her. "You're on private property without authorization, criminal trespass. I'm also seeing fresh damage to this door. You want to explain that?" She glanced at her phone, still streaming. "I'm with the HOA. We have regulatory authority." "HOA authority doesn't override trespass law," Hayes said flatly. "Do you have a court order granting access?" Silence. Hayes gestured to the SUV. "Is that your vehicle?" She nodded. "It's parked on private property. The owner wants it removed. Move it now, or I'm having it towed." Her eyes went wide. "You can't!" Hayes pulled out his citation book. "Yes, ma'am, I can. Move it yourself and accept a citation. Or refuse, and we tow it at your expense." She stood frozen. The livestream viewer count hit 400. She'd wanted an audience. Now they were watching her lose. She moved toward the SUV. Hayes held up a hand. "After I complete the citation," he wrote quickly, handed her the yellow copy. She got in the SUV, turned the key. Nothing. Just clicking. Dead battery. Hayes looked at the tow truck driver. "Hook it up." The driver backed the flatbed into position and lowered the ramp. She climbed out, still holding her phone, and watched as the winch chains rattled and her SUV was dragged onto the bed. The sound of metal on metal filled the air. Less than 5 minutes. Her white SUV, the one she'd driven onto my land 3 times a week for a month, was strapped down and tilted on the flatbed. Hayes walked over while the driver secured the chains. Filing a full report, criminal trespass, attempted burglary through the forced entry, and harassment. With your video evidence, the prosecutor can move forward. He glanced at her standing by the road. Live stream finally off. Follow through on that restraining order. I thanked him. The tow truck rumbled up the driveway, her SUV chained and angled on the bed, heading to impound. She had to walk to the county road to wait for a ride. I stood on my porch and watched her go. She didn't look back. The live stream had ended, but the recordings were already spreading. By evening, the whole lake would know. And so would anyone else she'd tried to bully. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning, 8 days after her SUV had been towed off my property. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, reviewing the quotes I'd received for replacing the damaged solar panel cables, when my laptop chimed. The sender was listed as the county attorney's office. Subject line, Rae Lakeview Estates HOA investigation results. I opened it immediately. The email was formal but direct. The county had received multiple complaints regarding the so-called Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association over the past 6 weeks. Mine wasn't the only one. Apparently, Roger, my neighbor 2 miles down the lake, had filed his own report after I'd gone public with the tow truck incident. So, had 3 other property owners in the area. The county attorney's office had conducted an investigation. What they found was damning. First, the HOA had no legal standing to enforce covenants on properties outside its declared boundary map. The boundary filed with the state in 2015 stopped half a mile north of my cabin. My parcel, along with 4 others that had been harassed, was never included. Second, the compliance citations they'd been issuing were fraudulent. No legal authority, no proper documentation, just intimidation tactics designed to look official. Third, and this was the part that made my hands tighten around my coffee mug, the man I'd seen at the meeting, the board president, had forged documents. He'd created fake addenda to the original HOA covenant, backdated them, and used them to justify expanding his so-called jurisdiction. The email went on. The county attorney was moving forward with criminal charges, fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit criminal mischief. They wanted me to testify as a witness if the case went to trial. I read the email 3 times, then forwarded it to Linda with a single line. "It's happening." Her reply came back in under 2 minutes. "Good, let's finish this." 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter. Inside was a copy of the criminal complaint filed against the board president. His real name was Caldwell Pierce, age 61, resident of the county for 37 years, former real estate developer. The charges were laid out in clean, bureaucratic language. Count 1, fraud for forging HOA documents. Count 2, extortion for threatening property liens that had no legal basis. Count 3, conspiracy to commit criminal mischief in connection with the vandalism to my dock and solar panels. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Around the same time, Hayes called me. He'd been arrested in connection with the dock vandalism, the man with the tattoo. His name was Kyle Trammell, age 34, employed sporadically as a handyman. When Hayes brought him in for questioning and showed him the security footage, Trammell folded almost immediately. He admitted to cutting the dock beams, spraying the paint on my door, and sabotaging the solar cables. He also admitted he'd been hired by Pierce, cash payment, $250 per job, no questions asked. Hayes walked me through what happened next. Trammell took a plea deal, guilty to criminal mischief and trespassing in exchange for testimony against Pierce. He was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, suspended to probation, and ordered to pay restitution. $3,000 to cover the cost of repairing the dock, replacing the solar cables, and fixing the tire my truck had blown on the nails scattered across my driveway. The check arrived a week later, signed by Trammell's public defender. I deposited it and immediately used part of the money to upgrade my security system. The woman from the SUV, whose name I learned from court documents, was Vera Callan, faced her own reckoning. Hayes had filed charges based on the footage from the day her vehicle was towed, criminal trespass, attempted burglary, because the repeated kicking of my door met the legal threshold for attempting forced entry, harassment, documented across multiple incidents. Her attorney tried to negotiate a dismissal, arguing she believed she had authority as an HOA officer. The prosecutor didn't buy it. Callan took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and harassment. The attempted burglary charge was dropped. Her sentence was a $2,500 fine, 1 year of probation, and 100 hours of community service. The judge also issued a restraining order. She was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my property for the next 5 years. Violation would result in immediate arrest. I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down, but Linda was. She sent me a text with a photo of the signed order. It's done. Pierce's case took longer. He refused a plea deal. His attorney argued that the HOA had acted in good faith, that any errors in documentation were clerical, and that Pierce had no knowledge of the vandalism. The prosecutor presented evidence methodically, forged signatures on the amended covenants, financial records showing cash withdrawals that matched the dates Trammell was paid, text messages between Pierce and Callan discussing how to pressure non-compliant owners into leaving, testimony from Trammell, from me, from Roger, from 2 other homeowners who'd been targeted. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Pierce was sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended to 18 months with the possibility of parole after serving 1 year. He was fined $10,000. He was ordered to pay restitution to the 5 property owners who had been harassed, a total of $15,000 split among us. My share was $3,000, and the HOA itself, the entity he'd used as cover for extortion, was formally dissolved by order of the state. Linda helped me file a civil lawsuit as well. We sued Pierce and the dissolved HOA for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and property damage. The lawsuit was straightforward. We had documentation, we had criminal convictions to point to, we had video evidence, police reports, and witness testimony. Pierce's attorney settled before it even reached a courtroom, $25,000, paid out of Pierce's personal assets since the HOA had no funds left. The settlement came with a stipulation. Pierce was prohibited from forming, joining, or operating any homeowners association in the state for the next 10 years. I used part of the settlement money to hire a surveyor, not because I needed another survey, but because I wanted a court-recorded plat that explicitly noted my property's independence from any HOA jurisdiction. The surveyor came out, verified the boundaries, and filed an updated legal description with the county recorder's office. The new deed notation read, "Parcel lies outside all recorded HOA boundaries, not subject to any homeowner association covenant, restriction, or enforcement action." It was permanent, binding, ironclad. A few weeks after the criminal trial ended, I drove into town and stopped by the coffee shop where I used to meet clients. I ran into Roger there. He shook my hand, bought me a cup, and we sat outside on the patio. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." I shrugged. "I just documented everything and let the system work." Roger laughed. "Most people don't have the patience for that. They get scared, they back down. You didn't." He told me he had checked his own deed after everything went public, found out his property wasn't in the HOA boundary either. He'd filed a complaint with the county attorney before Pierce was even arrested. "I should have done it sooner," Roger said, "but watching what you went through gave me the push I needed." I told him I was glad. We talked for a while longer, then went our separate ways. That evening, I sat on my porch and opened my laptop. I hadn't posted anything online since the day her SUV was towed, but I felt like the story deserved a closing note. I wrote it carefully, keeping it simple. Final update: the HOA that tried to force me off my land has been dissolved. The individuals responsible have faced criminal charges, fines, and restitution. My property is legally protected from any future HOA claims. Justice works when you document everything, follow the process, and refuse to back down. Thanks to everyone who supported me through this. I posted it. Within an hour, it had over 200 reactions. Comments poured in from people I'd never met. Some shared their own HOA horror stories. Others congratulated me. A few asked for advice on how to fight back against similar harassment. I responded to as many as I could, always with the same core message: document everything, know your rights, use the system. My phone buzzed late that night, a text from an unknown number. You made a powerful enemy. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I blocked the number. Whoever sent it, whether it was Pierce from a burner phone or someone still loyal to him, it didn't matter. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had legal protection. I had evidence. I had a system that had proven it would work if you gave it the chance. I set my phone down and looked out at the lake. The water was calm. The stars were bright. For the first time in 2 months, the cabin felt like mine again. Fully, completely, undeniably mine. I'd fought for it with paperwork and patience, with cameras and court dates, and I'd won. Not because I was stronger or smarter, but because I'd refused to let fear or intimidation replace facts. And facts, in the end, were undefeated. 6 months passed. The lake went through a full cycle: ice in February, thaw in March, green returning to the pines by April. I stood on the new dock I'd built to replace the one they had damaged, watching the sun drop toward the far shore. The wood beneath my feet was solid, treated pine, stainless steel fasteners, built to last. The kayak sat clean and secure on its rack, and the water lapped quietly against the pilings. Behind me, the cabin looked better than it had when I bought it. Fresh coat of stain on the exterior, new solar panels on the roof, upgraded from the ones that had been sabotaged. The door had been sanded and refinished, all traces of the red spray paint long gone. I'd done most of the work myself over the spring, not because I had to, because I wanted to. Every board I replaced, every nail I drove, felt like reclaiming something that had tried to be taken from me. I walked back toward the cabin as the light started to fade. The evening air was cool but not cold, and I could hear birds settling into the trees for the night. I climbed the porch steps and paused at the door. Above it, mounted in a custom oak frame, was a small plaque. I'd had it made a month ago. It wasn't large, just a simple engraved plate that read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted and filmed." Below that, in smaller letters, "Respect the law, respect each other." Inside, I poured a drink and sat down at the kitchen table. My laptop was open to an email I had received that morning from the county recorder's office. It was a confirmation that my updated property deed had been filed and recorded. The permanent notation was now part of the official record. Any title search, any future buyer, any HOA that ever tried to claim jurisdiction would see it immediately, not subject to any homeowner association covenant or restriction. It was ironclad. It was done. There was another email beneath it, this one from a man named Thomas, someone I'd never met. He lived on the opposite side of the lake and had seen my story shared online months ago. He wrote that he'd been receiving similar fake citations from a different group trying to form an HOA in his area. After reading what happened to me, he'd checked his deed, confirmed there was no covenant, and filed a complaint with the county. The harassment stopped within 2 weeks. He thanked me for going public, for showing that it was possible to fight back the right way. I replied briefly, told him I was glad it helped, told him to keep documenting if anything else happened. Then I closed the laptop and stepped back outside. The stars were just starting to appear, scattered across the darkening sky. I sat in the chair on the porch, the same one I'd sat in the night I first saw those headlights watching me from across the lake. There were no headlights tonight, just stillness, just peace. A few days later, I ran into Hayes at the hardware store in town. He was off duty, picking up supplies for a home project. We talked for a few minutes in the parking lot. He told me Pierce had been transferred to a minimum security facility downstate to serve out the rest of his sentence. Callan had completed her community service hours and was living 2 counties over now. As far as Hayes knew, neither of them had any intention of coming back to this area. "You did good," Hayes said, leaning against his truck. "Most people wouldn't have had the patience. They would have snapped, done something stupid. You stayed smart." I told him I just followed the process. He shook his head. "No. You trusted the process. There's a difference. A lot of people don't trust it enough to let it work." He was right. I'd been angry, scared at times, frustrated more than once, but I'd never let those feelings push me into doing something that would have put me on the wrong side of the law. I'd documented. I'd called the right people. I'd let evidence and procedure do the work. And in the end, that's what made the difference. I drove back to the cabin that afternoon and spent the rest of the day doing nothing in particular. I read for a while, made dinner, sat on the dock as the sun set. The lake was mirror still, reflecting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A pair of loons called to each other somewhere out in the deeper water. I listened until their voices faded, then headed inside. That night, I thought about what Hayes had said, about trust, about the process, about doing things the right way, even when it's harder, even when it takes longer. I thought about the people who'd sent messages thanking me for standing up, the ones who had found the courage to check their own deeds, to file their own complaints, to stop being afraid of organizations that only had power because no one questioned them. I didn't set out to be an example. I just wanted to keep my home, but in fighting for it the right way, I'd shown others that it could be done, that bullies with clipboards and fake authority weren't invincible. The law, when used correctly, was stronger than intimidation. I pulled the curtains closed, checked the camera feeds one last time out of habit, and saw the blinking red lights still recording, still watching. But now, they were just insurance, a reminder, not a necessity. I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at the cabin, the place I'd bought to find peace, the place that had been threatened, harassed, and vandalized, the place I'd fought for with nothing but evidence and persistence. It was mine, legally, permanently, undeniably mine, and no one, no matter how loud or aggressive or organized, could take that away. Not as long as I knew my rights, not as long as I stood my ground the right way. I closed the door and locked it, not out of fear, just out of habit, because this was home. If you've ever been pushed around by someone who thought power meant intimidation, you're not alone. Standing up the right way, with evidence and patience, isn't easy, but it works. If this story inspired you, or if you face something similar, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about people who refuse to back down and let justice do the talking, hit that subscribe button here at Karma Fence. We believe the truth always wins. You just have to be willing to fight for it.